Well, hello, wherever and whoever you are on the planet. No, your ears aren't playing tricks with you. This is not Alan B. Smith. Indeed, this is Carle, host of Behind the Obsidian Curtain here on KGRAradio.com. We're sitting in for Alan tonight. It's still paranormal now, and we are still going to cover all those wonderful things we usually do. Fear not, Alan is quite well and healthy. He has just maxed out on a bunch of projects that have come in his direction, some of it to do with the fact that most of us are shut in now and things have to reconfigure, etc. But you all know what we're talking about. Let's lift ourselves out of this, shall we, for just a bit, for actually 2 hours. We have a fascinating topic tonight. It's called America's Stonehenge. And our guest tonight is Dennis Stone. Let's just read his bio. And Dennis, you're there on the line, correct?
I am here, Carole. Good evening.
Absolutely. Good evening. So anytime you find something something that needs to be addressed within the bio, feel free to just go ahead and interrupt me. Let's do it like this. Dennis Stone is the president of America's Stonehenge. He graduated from Daniel Webster College in 1977 with a degree in aviation management and was a full-time commercial pilot for over 35 years before he retired in 2016. America's Stonehenge was opened to the public in 1958 by Dennis's father, Robert Stone. By the way, that name, Stonehenge, is that not perfect? You can't make that stuff up. Dennis has been involved in America's Stonehenge for most of his life and has always had a fascination with archaeology and archaeoastronomy. Since retiring, Dennis has found many serpentine walls and spirit windows throughout the site, among many other new discoveries. He's taken numerous courses, and he's traveled extensively to ancient sites, both in the United States and international venues. His family includes his wife, Pat, his son, Kelsey, and his daughter-in-law, Catherine. Hobbies, of course, there are hobbies. Traveling, indeed, boating, and classic cars. So hello again, Dennis. How are you?
So I'm doing good, Carole. Thank you so much for having me on this evening.
Well, this is terrific. It is not our first rodeo. Before I forget, and it slips through the cracks, I want to send props to Mark Eddy, who is definitely the secretary of the world, for even connecting us to begin with. And that was all done through Ron Tolvitar at Radio. So we have had a chance to back and forth before, and we're going to do it again later in the next month on Behind the Obsidian Curtain. So, something that is amazing to me that I didn't realize, as per the video that is on your fantastic website, and that is, again, let's see, I want to get that right. It is, it's not the website. Give us the title of the website specifically. Is it Stone?
It's StonehengeUSA.com.
Right. So if one searches America's Stonehenge, you'll get it. But StonehengeUSA.com is maybe a faster, easier way to do it. And I love it. The video on that site, on the overlay before it starts to play, it's an Albert Einstein quote: "The most beautiful thing we can experience is the mysterious." And that to me, that's such a wonderful choice of words, because there is nothing that says mystery, like this place does. And I was also intrigued by something that I hadn't realized before, that during the abolition times, that there were false walls built for the Underground Railroad on that site.
Well, that's correct, yeah. So the site has a lot of history, both history and prehistory to it. And certainly an important part of it was back in the 1800s when it was part of the Underground Railway. And they did find a slave manacle there back in the 1930s when the initial archaeological work began. And it's in Wilbur Siebert's, I believe his name is Wilbur Siebert's book, The Underground of Massachusetts. And he wrote The Underground of Ohio, The Underground of New York, and we're in the Massachusetts part. And there's actually talks about a gentleman named Mr. Poor and a Mr. Hussey, about 20 miles south of here in Shawshene Village in Massachusetts, where that was one of the underground stations. And they would bring the slaves to our place during the course of the evening. And there was a third gentleman, I forget his name, and they actually had the name of the horse named Nellie. So
for heaven's sake.
Wow. Yeah, but most of it was done in secrecy. But so we have a few details, and then the gentleman would bring the slave or slaves to our place, and they would be there only, for a night or two until they traveled further north towards Canada. But the gentleman would be back in time for breakfast back in Shawshing Village. So it was done very quietly over the course of an evening, and about 40-mile round trip, roughly, So, but it was part of the underground network for sure.
Right. I'm thinking of that old folk song, "Follow the Drinking Gourd," which definitely would figure in to that geolocation. That's incredible. And now, all right, so then going forward, and what can I say? But there is something to me about the energy that would remain in an area where something like that, because that, we kind of absorb this, we throw it off, but we can't really appreciate what that must have been like for everyone involved, because the gentlemen who were hiding the slaves, they were doing that. I'm sure that the risk was enormous for everybody involved. And it was. Yeah, there were actually there's federal people out looking and also slave hunters looking. So, and in 1850, the Fugitive Law was passed. And that's the year after Mr. Patty, the gentleman, had helped. But even before that, it was illegal to help slaves. You weren't supposed to be caught helping them. You could go to jail or face fines, your family and you. So, exactly. Yeah,
I'm sure it was nerve-wracking, and I'm sure they're always worried about it. So they had to do it very carefully and very quietly and leave really no paper trail if they could, that
right.
This was going on.
And I do recall when I was researching something that was coincidental to that era, spiritualism, American spiritualism, in New York. There was a meme besides leaving no paper trail. That's what triggered this in my memory. There were quilts that were stitched that had clues and patterns in them, and they would hang them over various fences and external walls, and you would go from quilt to quilt. It would give you the directions, and of course you would be tipped off to this ahead of time. But those energies. So we have I guess we could call those modern times archaeologically, and so overlaid or fueled by, I'm just so intrigued by that combined energy. So Jonathan Patty's cave. Now Jonathan Patty, I'm looking at something from the 1907 publication called The History of Salem, New Hampshire. That was 1907. So we go forward now in time, past the slavery times. Jonathan Patty, was he the initial owner of the area?
No, it was actually in 67, we have a report of two Native Americans that sold the land for £3 and I think 16 shillings, if my memory serves me correctly. And it became part of the Haverhill, Massachusetts, part of the Haverhill Peak. And I just came across several maps that show that peak. And and it's like a triangle that came out of Massachusetts into this area. And so we were part of Massachusetts until 1741, when the southeast part of New Hampshire and the northeast corner of Massachusetts was established. It was fought over for many years where the boundary was. So it was part of Massachusetts at the time. And so the Pattys did purchase the land from the Haverhill proprietors, they call them. And they bought a piece of land. It was a gentleman named Seth Patty. There were 5 generations of shoemakers. People call them farmers, although they did have domesticated animals and they did do some farming like everybody pretty much did back in those days. They were shoemakers by trade. They were cordwainers. And it was Jonathan's grandfather that bought the first piece of the hill we call America Stonehenge. And the hill is called Mystery Hill, the whole hill. It never had a name until my dad got involved with it in the 1950s. There were nicknames for it, Patty's Hill and Patty's Caves, But yes. But it never, until we opened it up in 1958, it didn't really have an official name. And then it went on the topographical maps, and it still is today called Mystery Hill. And it's a 360-foot hill above sea level. We're in southern New Hampshire, about 40 miles north of Boston and about 20 miles from the ocean. And so the Patty's grandfather bought a piece of the land. And sometime after 1750, when Salem was incorporated, they started building houses in this area. And that's probably when the house was built up on top of the hill. And it went from the grandfather to the son to Jonathan by 1802. And Christmas Eve, he got the land from his mother in a quitclaim. And then 1801, Christmas Eve of 1801. And the next year he moved into the house. We think the The mother actually may have lived there for a while. Her husband died in 1778 from war injuries, actually from the Revolutionary War.
Wow.
She marries like a third cousin and moves away. And I don't know if anybody stayed in the house for a few decades, but Jonathan takes it over. So they're basically shoemakers and had domesticated animals. And were, by some accounts, given credit for building a 110-acre complex of stone structures, by some people, But we think it's an ancient ceremonial site. And the Paddies modified it, to fit their needs. They had a house, and we've never been able to find the barn, though, because he had horses, obviously, and he probably had a few cows. We have his tax records. And for 3 years, he was actually a tax collector for the town of Salem. And before the Underground Railway, from 1830 to 1837, he took in the town paupers. He had a bid every year, put a bid out, and I guess the lowest bid got it. And he made one year $360 for taking. He had up to, I believe, 11 poor people living with him. They call them the paupers, poor people that couldn't take care of themselves.
Yes, right.
And he actually made money doing that, yeah. By the end of 1837, he no longer took in the town paupers after about 6 years. And that's, I believe, when the Underground Railway began. The house was empty because he had 5 daughters. He had 2 sons. One son died in Boston at going on 18 years old. And we don't know what happened to him, but he died pretty young. And he had 5. So people said, oh, Paddy and his 6 husky sons built the whole complex. But he actually had 5 daughters. They may have been husky, but I mean, I don't know if they went out and built walls and everything in multi-ton slabs. Some of the biggest roof slabs weigh 14 tons, So
yeah, that's
that
the
would
Paddy
be a legacy.
A heavy undertaking, to say the least. And by the way, for anybody listening who wants to do a Google on Jonathan Paddy, that is spelled Pattee, not like patty cake. So you might run into a sticking point if you want to find that. I wanted to ask you, Dennis, does any of that initial house, does that still stand?
Actually, we think it does. There's a possibility that, now Jonathan dies in 1849. And again, he could have had the slaves there, up to the time of his death, maybe even his wife. Her name was Betsy, and her maiden name was Mellon. So she might have stayed there a little bit after. Maybe some of the kids helped out. Some of that's kind of blurry. We don't have all the details. But we think after that point, the house does go to the son. His name was Seth. It wasn't supposed to. It was supposed to go to the grandson. And the will was hidden or missing for several years. 1863, right around the Civil War time, the will was found, and the grandson realized, his name was George, that it was supposed to be his property. And maybe there was a family feud going on, I don't know, but he turned around immediately and sold the property to a gentleman named Nathaniel H. Paul, who actually was a lumber guy. He came in and took the trees out of there. So there was a lumbering operation going on. And eventually it falls back into the Paddy family again later on in that century, in the late 19th century. But the house, we think, was actually taken off its foundation and moved down the hill about a third of a mile. There's a road that goes right down, and right in front of that road where it comes out on the main street, there's a house. And that book you mentioned by Edgar Gilbert, 1907, The History of Salem, shows a picture of the Paddy family standing right there in front of the house, in front of like a bay window, I think it is.
Oh, my.
And that house actually replaced the tavern that was there that must have burnt. So I think what happened is they probably recycled the house. They would have moved it down that hill, probably took the chimney down because some of the bricks are still on the site.
Wow.
The legend was that the house burnt down there, but they didn't find, back in the 1930s when they did a lot of excavations all the way up to, present, very little, if any, ash. If the house was consumed, you'd find burnt timbers and, the whole thing, the whole shebang. And you just don't. You find a lot of housewares there because whatever broke, they just threw out the windows. Basically, that was their dump, back in those days. People just threw stuff out. So it was just kind of good today for archaeologists, when they found out.
Exactly.
So, but one of the things that may have happened, too, is back in 1825 when Marquis de Lafayette came to America, and he traveled over the course of those 2 years. He was such a hero, and he was a 19-year-old general for General Washington, and he was involved with the French Revolution. He came back as a superhero, and he was taken on tour of the United States. And anything with Lafayette, like either Lafayette or Fayetteville, anything like Fayetteville, North Carolina.
Yes, right. All those names, right.
Yeah, amazing. All across America, right out to California. But he may have actually stayed at the Paddy Tavern in Salem, and 400 horses showed up there. 400 people on horses were part of the entourage, and they stayed at the Paddy Tavern, and that was Paddy's cousin. And what I think is he came over, he's missing for 3 hours. He's supposed to go to Derry, New Hampshire, which is right up the street, and go to the girls' school, the Adams Girls' School in Derry. And he's missing for 3 hours, and the girls were all ready for him to come up here. He was a superhero, and they were just waiting for this guy, all excited. And 3 hours later, he showed up late. They think he came over to pay respects to Jonathan's dad, to the wife actually, or Jonathan's mother, I should say. And there were some French Revolutionary buttons that were found on the property. That may have been something he gave to the family. It's one of those circumstantial, hard to prove ever things.
Right, yes.
But a lot of research was done on that. And he may have come over to the Paddies. And, he's from France, where a lot of the megalithic sites where people speculate maybe he was interested in the ruins too, besides seeing Patty's mother, Jonathan's mother, So,
that's a fascinating thought. Yes, right. So that would mean that if that was the case, then that would be a little, at least anecdotal evidence that there was something, even though it was mysterious in origin, that there was something there that was of intrigue, something ancient.
Right. Yeah, it would have been known. Yeah, definitely. And, so it would have been maybe two things, seeing Patty's, Jonathan's mom, and paying respects to the family and everything. Because he was actually a local hero, Jonathan's dad, because he died from, wounds from that war, in 1778. Right. So, and then Jonathan's mom was a widow, and then she marries, I think it's a second cousin, I believe it was. And then she moves away. But the house, I think, is standing today. Yeah, it's standing right across from our driveway, basically, and it looks pretty much like it does in the 1907. Edgar Gilbert, by the way, was a friend of Robert Frost, and when they were young, they worked down in Lawrence, Massachusetts, in the mills together. Oh. So he's kind of poetic, too, when he describes what our place looks like. Yeah, they were friends, and my grandfather had Robert for a teacher in Pinkerton Academy. But
my gosh, that is absolutely striking. All these incredible overlaps of American history. So intriguing. And speaking of overlaps, can we circle back just briefly to Betsy Mellon? Was she by any chance of the Carnegie Mellon? Was she that Mellon family? Do you know?
I think that would be, I've wondered that myself. That's a great question, because I'm looking at my deed. And I was looking at my dad's 1990 genealogy done by one of the New England Antiquities Research Association. Now, that group's called NERA. My dad started at 1964. And it's still going strong today to research these ancient sites like America Stonehenge, and they have about 800. One of the gentlemen, though, was a kind of a genealogist. So he put together my family's, and I was looking at it's a really thick binder, and I was looking at it last year, and then I was looking at it recently. My great-grandfather, who I never met, he died in 1941. On my dad's side, his name was Everett St. Clair Stone, and that caught me because of the St. Clairs, in the Da Vinci Code, the Rosslyn Chapel, and I've been in the Westford Knight, which is another interesting thing in Massachusetts.
Wow.
Which may be an indication that Sir Henry Sinclair came over in 1398 to the New World, and he went into Westford, Massachusetts, among other places in the Northeast, including Nova Scotia, and they left a carving of a knight there, and it's about 100 years before Christopher Columbus, which, by the way, Columbus is related by marriage to Sir Henry Sinclair. So
I did not know that. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. There's a lot of these things that overlap, like you say. And
they do. That's fascinating.
But I did find that St. Clair, so I did a little thing on that family search, and sure enough, in fact, one of the names in England that's connected with my great-grandfather was Henry St. Clair Stone, and there was a couple other St. Clairs, and it is the family tree. So I'm going to try to go back a little further and see if we are, because in our museum we have actually a full-size cast of that Westford Knight on our wall. We've had it there for almost 20 years, and the thing now maybe is some relationship between my family and that, besides just because it's before Columbus. Anything before Columbus we're interested in,
Yes.
So you think that may be related to the St. Clair? I don't know. We got to do a little more study.
All these clues, yeah, they're so intriguing. And I know Mystery Hill, in terms of literature, et cetera, that H.P. Lovecraft wrote of a place that may have been inspired by Mystery Hill, his Dunwich Horror, for instance, et cetera, and the talk about the ancient sacrificial stone altar, et cetera, Martha's Vineyard-ish kind of, but south. So what's your take on that possibility, or do you have one?
Well, we actually had a number of researchers that looked at that too. And back about 1990 or 89, there was a booklet put out called Horror on the Hill, and it was about the H.P. Lovecraft visit to our site,
Mm-hmm.
and that's been, I guess, proven. And it was out of Rhode Island, of course, and it came up with another gentleman named Munn. I think the guy's name was Harvey Munn. It began with an H
Yes,
too.
Munn with two N's, I think. Yes, right.
That's it. Yeah, and they came together, and I believe their wives came up too. And they actually came in and they did visit the site. And I guess the only question is, did he visit the site in time to, make it inspirational for that book, Dunwich
Right.
Horror, or
Yes.
was he too late? So I think the timing might have been okay, but that's something that people out there that really do research, if they want to help us with that, I think that's the only question that remains. But he did visit the site before he passed away, and I think he may have come twice. I'd have to have the booklet in front of me. It's also in my dad's 2003 book, which is called, America Stonehenge, which I don't have a copy in front of me at the moment. But I loved H.P. Lovecraft did visit the site. And then there was a question of Aleister Crowley coming up too, because he did come to New Hampshire during the about little over 100 years ago.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Tell us about Aleister Crowley. Wow.
Yeah, I went to a place up near Alexandria, New Hampshire, and he named the lake. It's Newfound Lake today is the name of the lake. It's a beautiful, one of the purest lakes in New England, and in fact in the country, I guess. It's beautiful. It's in the Lakes region of New Hampshire. Apparently, he did come out of Boston on the train. He went through, I guess, Nashville, New Hampshire on the Boston to Montreal train, I guess, and he got off at a stop there, and he spent some time there. And the name of the lake was something like I probably mess up the word, but it's Passamaquoddy or something like that. But it's a name that hasn't been used.
Passamaquoddy, is that I think there's an Abenaki Native American tribe called Passamaquoddy. Would it be Passamaquoddy Lake?
It could be, because you are right about that. I think if I'm looking at my dad's book right now, I might be able to find it, but it is a name that was used into the 1800s, and then it became Newfound Lake after that. So, so there's possibility he did come to the site, and it would have been, I think, around 1916 or 1917, I think it was. But it was never really, not like H.P. Lovecraft. They were never able to, have absolute proof that he did come to the site. But he's an interesting character anyway.
Oh, yes, definitely interesting. What did he, I'm not sure, was he the self-proclaimed most evil man in the world or some such? I know that, I just sort of, when I'd be doing research, that name was a real stopper to me. And it's sort of like, there's that name. Let's move right along. And I never pursued it. But I think, perhaps that he was just, he could have been, I suppose it's not too much of a stretch to say that he was ahead of his time and that he was maligned and misunderstood by, shall we say, the powers that be, et cetera. It's a difficult thing to really have a take on that. You'd almost have to know somebody who knew somebody who wrote a biography of his. And so this is just such a place that is, the history, the richness is incredible. We have 2 minutes till the break, and it's just fortunately we have 2 hours to really, shall we say, dig into this, archaeologically speaking. And William Goodman here. I'm looking at something. This is actually a Wikipedia entry that you may or may not be in agreement with. The site's history is muddled partly because of the activities of William Goodwin, who became convinced that the location was proof that Irish monks or the Culdays had lived there. What do you think about that?
That was, William Goodwin's theory of the site. First, he thought it was Viking when he first visited it in 1936. In 1937, he purchased 20 acres of land. And he changed his mind after they began clearing the brush and debris so he could get a better look at the site. And being all stone structures, huge stone slabs, he goes, gosh, this does not look like, the sod houses or the wooden houses the Vikings would have built for the settlement. He said, I think it must be an Irish Cultic monk. And that's even the Viking sagas talk about when they went out of the Faroes, Iceland, Greenland, into Canada, they always were coming across these white-robed men, probably were Irish monks that were preceding them across, heading west into the New World. And so his theory, and he wrote a book in 1946 called The Ruins of Great Ireland and New England. And he died in 1950 still believing that the Irish Cultic monks were responsible for our site. And I believe about 15 out of the site, we have a whole list that he put down. I think it's 15 sites, including ours, that he thought that the Irish monks created as a sanctuary away from the Vikings, for instance. They were fleeing the Vikings and trying to Christianized Native Americans too at the same time.
All right, let's leave
the
we're up against the clock and a break here, Dennis. I'm sorry to do this rude interrupt, but we will leave it with the incredible men in the long white robes and where whoever they were, and we will be right back. You're listening to Paranormal Now on KGRARadio.com, your source for alternative paranormal information. We'll be right back.
Are you intrigued by Paranormal Talk Radio? You'll love the new Paranormal Radio app from TalkStream Live. You'll find a great selection of talk shows covering UFOs, ghosts, strange phenomena, and much more. Download the Paranormal Radio app now and start listening to the very best in paranormal talk entertainment, including the network you're listening to right now. The Paranormal Radio app, free in Google Play and the iOS App Store.
Now you have the inside contact for alternative talk radio. The Planet. KGRARadio.com.
And we are back. This is Paranormal Now. Usually you would be listening to Alan B. Smith. Tonight is Carole, that's me, and my incredible guest, Dennis, well, I'll try it again, Dennis Stone of StonehengeUSA.com, giving us literally chapter and verse. Before we went to break, we were talking about the possibilities that Aleister Crowley, the self-proclaimed most evil man in the world, visited the area. And you found something to clarify that, Dennis, yes?
I did, Carole. Yeah, I found a chapter in the book. The book was actually sitting right next to me, and it says Crowley visited the United States on 3 separate occasions, including a 5-year stay. Started in 1914. It is during this extended visit of 1914 to 1919 that Crowley began infrequent trips to Lake Passaquoddy in New Hampshire for magical retirements.
Passaquoddy. So can you spell Passaquoddy? I had it wrong.
Yeah. So it's Pasquaney.
Okie dokie. I'll just leave that pronunciation to you, but nonetheless, okay. So
I don't know if I could trust myself on the pronunciation, but it's Newfound Lake today. It's a beautiful place, not too far from Lake Winnipesaukee. But it says various stories recounted by Crowley and his biographers of this trip include encounters with ball lightning, sacrificial ceremonies involving frogs, and what is referred to as star sponge vision, in parentheses, whatever that is. So I'll leave it to your imagination.
Well, that ball lightning, that's very intriguing. I wonder if there's a way back in, let's see, an ancient, if you will, not archaeologically ancient, but an ancestor of mine, sometime before the Revolution, actually was in a tavern, and ball lightning came down a chimney, hit him in the head, and he never recovered, ultimately died several months later. My mother also witnessed ball lightning several times in her life, and so, there was always is there some genetic component? I have never seen ball lightning, but I'm wondering if there was a geolocation connection there to the ball lightning.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, our site is on a fault line, and they say there's earthquake light,
yes, right,
lights, that kind of thing. Yeah,
right.
So, but it does. One other thing, it says, during one of his, he had a diary, I guess, and he wrote on June 23rd, 1916, he was in Bristol, New Hampshire, and that's right by Lake Newfound Lake, and that's probably about 60 miles north of here, basically. And so he could have come down here on the train. The train, he could have made it by here on the train and visited the place, or on a wagon or whatever. Or they had automobiles back then too, so he could have done that.
Yes, right.
But as far as H.P. Lovecraft, it looks like he was here in July of 1928 with H. Warner Munn of Providence, Rhode Island. Yeah, so I found that
Providence.
Too, as we were just talking.
Oh, that's fascinating. Thank you for that, because that's that it's all, again, these overlaps, the richness of these possibilities, and oh my gosh, what fodder for conjecture and imagination.
It's the proper place for all the weird and mysterious stuff, for sure. And
it is
uphold that all the time.
That's just incredible, and who knows what else you will stumble upon or dig up, should we say?
Yeah. Literally.
Right, exactly. So now, okay, so let's see if I can get this correct. Probably won't. So just, toss stuff in. Your father bought the property from, would it be from William Goodwin, or was it later on? It's a Goodwin.
Actually, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And he was an insurance executive, yes?
That's right. Yeah. So Goodwin was an insurance millionaire. He was from Hartford, Connecticut, and he did spend time in Kansas City working for a bank. Went out to the west in Washington State. He was in Seattle, and he worked for 2 different companies. And then he was already pretty well-to-do, and he actually took a little time off after he was involved with insurance out there. He actually set up the office to run without him, I guess, himself for a while. It ran so well. He went up to the Yukon and did some gold, look for gold up there for a while.
Wow.
So, but then he came back. The office was running good, and then they promoted him and moved him to San Francisco, and eventually moved back to New England. And but before that, actually, I missed something. He went to Ohio for 15 years, and when he was in Ohio as an insurance insurance executive, he actually was out looking at some of the mounds there. And Ohio has about 10,000 ancient mounds.
That's where my imagination took me. So indeed, and so and joining us at the top of the next hour will be Charles Smar, who happens to live, if I've got it right, in the state of Ohio. We can get his input on that. So the mounds. So that now, then, of course, now, okay, my brain says that it was the interest in the mounds that led him to the site where you are.
That's right. Yeah, kind of in an indirect way. He had actually, when he moved back to New England after being in Ohio, and he was out on, like I mentioned, on weekends, mapping some of these mounds for the state of Ohio, the Department of Transportation, so they knew where these things were. When he came back to New England again, he bought an axe, and it was a Viking axe, I guess, because he was interested in, old stuff, and ancient stuff. And this axe, he got in contact with an old friend from Seattle, Washington. His name was Olaf Strandwell, and this gentleman was just writing a book about Viking runes, the ancient writing of the Vikings.
Right.
And he actually visited him back. I guess he traveled back out there and visited him. And then this guy says, hey, there's some stone structures in New England. And it wasn't our site he was referring to. It was the site of Malcolm Pearson as a chamber called the Upton Chamber. And it looks like a gigantic igloo all made out of stone. It's kind of like a passage grave you'd find in Europe. And it's up in Massachusetts. And today it's a park. They actually turned it into a park and they preserved it. But Malcolm's family bought it about 100 years ago, and Malcolm was 16 years old, and said, a young man, there's an old cellar hole out back. It wasn't a cellar hole. It was, this kind of a four-bell dome-shaped structure with a big, entrance. And it didn't look like something a New England farmer would build at all, and we don't think it is. And that got Malcolm's interest back in the 1920s. And when Goodwin finally connected with him, he came up from Hartford. He visited that chamber. They took him to one other chamber in Hopkinton, which is where the Boston Marathon starts, Hopkinton, Massachusetts. Because the marathon wasn't run 2 days ago because of the yesterday, because it was supposed to be yesterday, actually. But that's where it starts. There's a chamber there, and they took him to see that, and then the Upton Chamber. And then he says, hey, there's a complex of structures up in Salem, New Hampshire, you got to see it. And I believe it was a week later, they all traveled up to see the site, and Goodwin just was totally blown away by it. He bought it, 20 acres the next year, and he worked on the site from 1937 to about the time he died, 1950. And when he died, he willed it to Malcolm Pearson, which was very nice because Malcolm was really helping him out on it. He was a professional photographer too, so we have photographs going back to the day one when Goodwin first began working on the site. And then my dad, when he first heard about it, in 1955, he eventually met Malcolm. And then he opened it up 3 years later to the public. So it was Malcolm that my dad met. Not, Goodwin had died 5 years before my dad ever even heard about this site.
I see. What led your father in this direction?
Well, just like we're doing right now, it's a radio show. And
oh my God!
I was just going through. Yeah, it was pretty cool because I was just going through my dad's really extensive files. We have almost 100 years of archives, and I'm going through all of this stuff well before my dad got into it, original letters by Goodwin and people before Goodwin about this site. And I came across the actual gentleman that was a radio talk show host was Alton Hall Blackington, and he had a show called Yankee Yarns. It was on one of the biggest radio stations in Boston, but it was also in radio stations all over New England, syndicated kind of. on. And I found this, and it was 1949, 6 years before my dad heard that radio show, that he actually had it on twice that year, which I did not know until 2 days ago. I thought 1955 was the original airing of it, but it was 1949. They had the whole thing where he's actually asking, I believe it was Malcolm, because he hadn't heard from Goodwin. He was wondering what's going on with Goodwin, I guess. Goodwin was very sick at the time. He was going to pass the next year, so he was very, very sick. He couldn't respond. So he wanted to know if he could not only do a show about it again, the second one, because his listeners really wanted to know more about this site, but if they could actually come up and visit the site, actually physically see the site. So that was the letter, and I got a nice picture of it. I got it all saved and all archived now. I never saw that before. So he actually was on NBC. That was on NBC.
Okay.
NBC too, on NBC TV, actually, with the Jankians. I don't know if it was just in the New England area or whether it was national. I haven't been able to find that out yet. So,
what a search that will be! That's extremely thrilling. That's really, and I had no idea. Wow. Okay, that's knocked my socks off. Here I stand without socks. But wow. So are you going to put this all into a book?
Yes, I am. We are. In fact, we're going to add that to the book. I've been working on a book for about 2 years, and I would say probably about 80% done now. And but the problem I realize is I'm going through my dad's stuff even more now that we're all stuck in. I'm doing a lot more of that. I may have to back off. I was going to try to have it out this summer. I may have to put it out this fall because there's just so many interesting things that I could add to it that would be so pertinent. I have original letter from Malcolm Pearson to Goodwin in 1936 before we ever visited the site, the actual letter. I didn't know I had that either. I just found that yesterday.
Wow, this is incredible. Yeah, and another overlap is that my parents were in radio. My father would have been in radio in 1949 and then moved into television as a news broadcaster. It was way before It was before they had the teleprompters, and my dad liked to deliver the news into the camera, Walt Carle, and KTTV, KMPC, and so he would memorize the news so that he didn't have to be looking down at copy. Yeah. So wow, this is a fascinating overlap. I'm just absolutely tickled. This is incredible. And again, you're going to have to slow the roll on your book so that you can include all this amazing new stuff you've stumbled upon. Wow.
Yeah, a lot of really cool stuff. Yeah, that my dad saved everything, thankfully. He never threw anything away as far as paperwork goes. So
yes.
I'm sure we're going to find more things too. I got actually original letters from Belzimir Stephenson. He was at Dartmouth College. He was one of the gentlemen in the 1950s that was interested. And I found a handwritten letter by him I didn't know we had either. And I think the Arctic Center up at Dartmouth College is still named after him. He died in 1963, and he was a member of the Early Sites Foundation that was formed in 1954 with Malcolm Pearson and several other members. Hugh Morrison from Dartmouth College, and there was Frank Glenn, president of the Connecticut Archaeological Society. By 63, a number of these people died, and so the organization folded, and that's when my dad's group, NERA, in 1964 took over. But that group was actually involved with the very first Viking settlement, Alonzo Meadow, up in Newfoundland, and it was one of the members' boys. So this group had some money. They sent one of the members up with the son, and the son was actually helping out on the dig, I guess. And the National Geographic was there.
Really?
And Anna and Helga Instadt, the husband and wife team that actually located that settlement, because people said there's something strange over there. And they went and they spent a number of seasons working on it. And when this early sites member and the son were there, they actually found the world to spin wool. And the son found the stone world. And they identified it as a Viking artifact. So, although I don't think he gets a lot of credit, maybe he does in the paperwork, but, he really deserves credit. And it was the Early Sites Foundation, and that group was formed because of America's Stonehenge. So there's a little legacy to that, too. In 1960s, when that happened, they actually proved the Vikings, made it to the New World. 1959, we could have an argument like the Viking sagas are fantasy. They're myths, they're not legend. Right. But, or the other way, but they did prove it, and that was one of the groups that was there helping out.
And that is an unimaginable thing. A lot of people, and I'm thinking of the controversy that must have inspired.
Oh yeah, a lot. Absolutely, yeah. Even some today, on that.
Right.
But they've proven it, and now I guess the controversy today is how long are the Vikings coming over for? And I saw a PBS live streaming 2 years ago, and they used the Worldview 3 satellite that went up in 2014, and they've been finding more pyramids in Egypt and Guatemalan temples, and they found that second Viking settlement called Point Rosie, 400 miles southwest of Alonzo Meadow. And I believe it was a boat repair station, I believe. And what really struck me at the end of the PBS special was they think the Vikings were coming over. And at that time, they were no longer Vikings. They were Christianized, and they were called Greenlanders by then.
Oh, I see.
And they were coming. Yeah, and so they may have been coming into Canada and maybe into United States too, because they think they were going from Greenland to the New World for about 400 years. When I grew up, I heard 1 year with Leif Erikson, and then I heard maybe 25 years. And that was like 4 centuries possibly coming into the New World. That's amazing. That was kind of shocking to me when I was watching that.
That's a hell of a long time indeed, and with a lot of implications of influence and culture. And now, would I be wrong to say that we are kind of in a time span, geolocation? Are we talking Oak Island here at all?
Let's see. Yeah, I think Oak Island might be a little bit after that, possibly. I think a little bit later on the timing on that.
Okay.
I think the Viking era would have ended when the Little Ice Age started occurring in the 14th century, and a bishop goes up to Greenland to get the tithe, I guess. And they have the name of the person and everything. And what he reports is that the people are gone. They don't find mass bodies laying on the ground like, I think there were 5,000 people there. They do find the normal burials and everything. But what happened is it got so cold because of the Little Ice Age, the animals weren't reproducing and the crops weren't growing, whatever they were using, for crops there.
Yes.
And they had to leave, and they don't go to Iceland, which is actually a little milder place, and they don't go back to Europe. They seem to have disappeared. I thought so that they came back into Canada and the United States because they knew it was warmer there, and they left Greenland, and then Oak Island, I think, would take place. Trying to think, it might be 100-something years after that, probably 150 years later, maybe.
Okay, so I'm all fuzzy on that. So yeah, okay.
Maybe, yeah, I'm a little fuzzy too. It might be 200 years later than that. Maybe it's 200 years, yeah. But it is in the time of the Sir Henry Sinclair time period. And there's a place called Spirit Pond in Maine. It's where George Pompum had a settlement the same year as Jamestown. Jamestown stayed, and it was successful, but the one in Maine, it was so cold that it wasn't successful. So after one season, that particular settlement was abandoned. But when they were digging, I should say 1971, 3 stones were found there. One they called a map stone, and then 2 other stones with writing. They believed they were rune stones. And when my dad dug on the site the next year in 72 and 73 in Spirit Pond, they found what looked like sod houses near where the 3 stones were found.
Really?
And they did find some I guess it was the last quarter 1800s artifacts. So somebody was there at that time for sure. But they also got carbon datings, clay pipes, and I think what the other artifact is that could put it back to an earlier time period. But the radiocarbon dating of one of the beams, and it must have been a ceiling beam because you had sod walls and then you had a roof made out of wood with timbers. And one of the timbers was carbon dated to 1405 AD. And I remember back then people were disappointed because if you're thinking Viking, you're thinking 1,000 years ago. 1,400, what is that? But if that's true that the Viking descendants were coming over for the next 400 years, it might be one of their people, a Viking descendant, a Greenlander.
Exactly,
place,
right.
So it really, actually, to me, that's pretty exciting, that time period. And Sir Henry Sinclair could have been there in 1398, so puts it in that same era. And he had 1/4 of his blood was Norwegian from his mother, I guess. So he had some Viking blood in him. He had Scottish blood, and he had French blood, and he was in New York, Islands, up
yes,
in Scotland.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Oh, that's just that's so intriguing. And when you actually when one stops to picture how they would have, what we're talking about, wooden ships, yes?
Exactly. Yeah. The Irish would have had the hide cover boats, those what they call them, the Corax or Currax, I guess they call them, the hide cover.
Yes, right.
And actually Tim Severin back in 1976 and 77, over the course of those 2 years, he sailed across the Atlantic Ocean on a replica of an Irish monk hide covered boat, trying to replicate St. Brendan the Navigator, who may have come over in the 6th century AD, another Irish, really early. He may have been the leader of the Irish coming over, St. Brendan's they call it the navigation of St. Brendan.
Now, am I correct in connecting that then to this William Goodwin's being convinced that the location in the area was proof that the Irish monks, the Chaldees, had lived there? Would that be the connection?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's in his book too. Exactly. Great point you brought up, because that was part of that. It's been known for years, and even in Goodwin's time, 80 years ago, they were talking about that. Probably more talking about it more back then, maybe. Because people didn't have TVs and all the distractions we have today. But that's a great point. It would have been probably St. Brendan would have been one of the earlier Irish monks if that happened. It's one of these things. Can we ever prove that? With conclusive evidence? I don't know. But it's like the Viking thing. If we could just find something solid, and they can say, okay, then that's for sure he did make it over. But it's the same kind of narrative too. It sounds like St. Brendan not only describes so he might have gone around on a complete loop, ending down in the Caribbean, and then making his way up the eastern seaboard, and then past Iceland, because he talks about fire under the water. That would be submarine volcanoes. He talks about crystal mountains, which would be icebergs. But down in the south, he talks about turquoise waters. He talks about the type of plants and type of birds. And he also talks about the sun being very high overhead. Well, that would be, a southern latitude,
Yes.
And then it all makes sense. It really makes a lot of sense when you read it. There's things embellished in there. But if you look at, just try to pick out all the different things like the turquoise waters, the height of the sun overhead, the warmth, and all these. It sounds like this guy actually was on a voyage that did a whole loop, and he went around, ended up down in the Caribbean, and then up the eastern seaboard, and then back to Europe. It sounds just like what you would do, and you may not have the technical words, but you put in the words that you could use. What your vocabulary had in it to describe like a crystal mountain, probably an iceberg. If you never seen one
exactly.
before,
sure. How especially with the sun glinting on it, ice would look like crystal.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you're right. So that's what's inspired William Goodwin, and we don't think he was completely wrong, because there's still a lot of thought that the Irish monks did make it to the New World. So he may have been off at our site, for instance, but there may be some other sites that may have been built more recently that may have something to do with his theory. The Irish monks arriving in the New World.
Exactly. And so I get a part of me just to round up the to lasso the Irish monks, as it were. Then what happened? And where did they go? How did that work? If they
may
were
have
here?
Intermarried with the Indians. There's so many different legends of when the first official Europeans came over after 1492. Of like Verrazano came over, for King Francis I. He was Italian, but he came over, and his brother was a map maker, and he came over into the outer banks of the Carolinas. And then he makes his way past Chesapeake Bay. He doesn't seem to go in there. And what his goal? I think his goal was to find a Northwest Passage, to head up towards the Pacific Ocean. So the Chesapeake Bay didn't really. I guess he didn't spend any time there. He went past the Delaware Bay. He goes into the New York Harbor, because today the Verrazano Narrows Bridge there. I used to fly over that all the time going into Kennedy or LaGuardia Airport, that beautiful bridge.
Oh, right, exactly, yes.
It's huge. And then he spends a little time on the Hudson River area, and then he ends up going along Long Island Sound, making his way past Connecticut into Rhode Island, and he goes into the Narragansett Bay. And according to the narrative that I have, that when he went in there, a Native American met him at his boat, came out on a boat, some sort of canoe or whatever, met him. And when he introduced himself, the Native American said his name was Magnus, which sounds like a Scandinavian name.
It does indeed. Oh my gosh! So there we go. That wow! These connections are just amazing. Yeah.
Well, he describes some of the people as quite much taller than he, much more fair-skinned than he. And also some had like green or blue eyes and light-colored hair. And other members of the tribe would have more Native American features, a little darker complexion and eyes.
Yes, right.
So it sounds like a mixed blood. Well, 90 years later, Roger Williams, who founded Rhode Island, spent time with the Narragansett. And he said the same thing. This is 90 years after Verrazano, approximately, that the same thing, that they were very welcoming. They were tall. Some of these were very tall. Some were very fair-skinned. Some had light-colored hair and light-colored eyes. And the word Narragansett, some people say, is a corruption of Northgang settlement. So it might be some Norse there, if not the Irish monks, that might have intermarried with the Native Americans.
Right. Oh, my God, that's incredibly intriguing. We've got about 2 minutes until the break, and when we come back, I absolutely want to now, as I punned before, dig into some of the specifics of what is on your site and what people can see, and we're going to bring in Charles Smar, who has some incredible questions, and well, actually, he's got the knowledge. He's able to ask these questions I can't even begin to pose, and in terms of some of the specifics of Copper Age, blah, 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 etc. And I'd love to have you describe some of what people can see when they visit your site, because that's just amazing. So now that having been said, here we are with 2 extra minutes until that happens. Also, Charles is going to be putting into the chat room, he's going to be putting a LiDAR image that I got through Mark Eddy. Thank you so much, Mark Eddy. LiDAR, and I want to read this thing. This is a good time to do this. In case, and I was not, I had to go to Wikipedia, which is good for certain things. The definition of LiDAR, which is also LIDAR and LADAR, it is a surveying method that measures distance to a target by illuminating the target with laser light and measuring the reflected light with a sensor. Differences in laser return times and wavelengths can then be used to make digital 3D representations of the target. The name LiDAR, now used as an acronym of Light Detection and Ranging, sometimes Light Imaging, Detection and Ranging, was originally a portmanteau of light and radar. LiDAR sometimes is called 3D laser scanning, and that's a special combination of a 3D scanner and laser scanning. It has terrestrial, airborne, and mobile applications. So on that note, we still have a little bit of time. How is it pronounced? Is it geodesy or geodesy? I'm not really sure about that word. But however one pronounces it, it's commonly used, LiDAR is, to make high-resolution maps. Geomatics, archaeology, that's kind of where we're going here. Forestry, seismology, atmospheric physics, etc. And when we come back, we will be talking about the the LiDAR. See, there we go. It's so easy to slip, when you're not a techno person. But we'll be talking about the LiDAR imaging, and we'll be talking about the specifics with you, Dennis Stone of America's Stonehenge, USA. This is Carole for Alan B. Smith's Paranormal Now here on KGRAradio.com. Your finger on the pulse of everything about alternative talk radio. We'll be right back.
Mainstream media's most wanted. KGRAradio.com.
And we're back. We told you we would be, and here we are. This is Carole sitting in for Alan B. Smith. No, you haven't lost your mind. It's not a factor of the isolation. I am sitting in for Alan B. Smith, Paranormal Now tonight, and my guest is Dennis Stone of Stonehenge, USA. Now adding to this incredible conversation is Charles Smar. That's Smarr. And as I have said to Charles previously, he needs to add a T to the end of his name because he is smart indeed. You might know him if you're a familiar to KGRA chat room. He is Blue Orb, a moderator in chat, and he has incredible insight and knowledge of stuff where my knowledge fails. Hence, he joins us now. Hello, Charles.
Good evening, Carole. And good evening. Glad to talk to you again, Dennis.
So, good evening. Nice to hear from you.
Okay.
And we've done this before, so I'm going to let you, Charles. You can talk chapter and verse regarding some of this stuff, such as Copper Age finds, etc., and the age of the. So, where do you want to start?
Well, I guess let's start at the beginning. Let's go all the way back. The earliest dates that you have for the carbon dating on the site. Where do they go, Dennis?
Well, on the main site, which is 1 acre, with that fence that Mr. Goodwin put up, goes back to 4,000 years, plus or minus about 250 years.
Uh-huh.
But outside of that, near the North Stone, about 400 feet from the main site, back about 1995, they're doing shovel test pit study across the entire hilltop, and they found what appeared to be a fire pit, and that dated to about 7,400 years, plus or minus, again, about 250 years before present. Yep. And that's the earliest evidence we have on the hill right now. We have 12 carbon datings, by the way. Those are 2 of the 12.
Uh-huh. That's pretty amazing, really. So as far as the actual construction of the site, that indicates that it was at least the beginnings of its construction go back to 2000 BC.
That's correct, yeah. And we do have a professor from Penn State, Dr. Winkler. He passed away in 2001 after working on the site for a few years. And he was an astronomer from Penn State from 64 up to about 1999 when he retired. And he actually said that there was like 3 stages of construction similar to Stonehenge, like stage 1, 2, and 3 at the site, starting at 2,000 years BC, as you mentioned. And he thought that the site probably it evolved, and even the astronomy there evolved, from it might have moved from one astronomical center to a different astronomical center, and possibly at 2000 BC, the North Stone and the solstices, what we call the quarter days and the cross quarter days stones were set up. And when we surveyed the site from 1973 to 1977 using Beverly Pearson Associates, they're a professional survey company in New Hampshire, and the gentleman that was the head of it was actually the president of New England Surveyors Association. So we got somebody reputable, and it was his son. Beverly was the owner, and his son, Charlie Pearson, who's still alive today. He began surveying the site, and by 1977, we had enough data collected that we sent it to the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics in Cambridge, Mass. And in 1978, the results came back, and they said that if these marker stones were used for astronomical purposes, they would work approximately 1800 BC, plus or minus, I think it said 200 years, due to the Earth's tilt very slowly changing. And one other interesting thing, besides the 26 alignments, including the North Star, was there are 23 other star alignments with the site. And Dr. Winkler, during that 3.5-year period before he passed away suddenly, was working on those alignments. So that would have been about 13 years after that the report came out that he was working on that. And he found almost every one of those other 23 alignments. They're helical, sunrises basically with stars like Sirius and, Deneb and a couple of, Arcturus. There's a bunch of other ones, Izar. I can't think of all of them off the top of my head. So we think around 2000 BC, the site's construction began, but it wasn't finished then. In fact, he never finished it, actually, from what we can tell.
That was something. That was a question. That was going to be my next question. Really, it was going to go back to, because when we talked before, I had later thought about it, but just what kind of a time span we're talking about with this building, and you're saying it probably was never really completed, that there were was a culture or several cultures that used the site, and over at least around 2,000 years of time.
Right.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, exactly. He actually said the first part may have been the first phase of it would have been about a 500-year period, and then he puts the next phase, or the second phase, about 1,100 years, and then the last one was about 1,000 years period of time. So talking about 2,600 years from the beginning. So close to what you said, over 2,000 years basically of construction. In Stonehenge, again, that took over 1,500 years, I believe. Been there a few times. It was like 1, 2, 3, and the third stage was ABC, I think it was. Similar to Stonehenge, though. Yeah.
How large are the largest stones on the site? I know you mentioned something about one that was a roof stone that had fallen. That was pretty sizable.
Oh yeah. Actually, there are 2 of them that have fallen, and they're kind of next to each other, not too far from the patio area. One of them may have fallen because the patty's built a house there and probably disturbed it. And that one weighs about 7 or 8 tons. The one next to it weighs probably about 4 to 5 tons. It's about 163 pounds per cubic foot. So you just do the dimensions of the stone, and you come up with a pretty close approx. But the heaviest roof slab, though, is actually one that's still in place, and it weighs 14 tons, it's estimated, so almost 30,000 pounds. And it was actually came out of the earthquake fault line. So the earth split the stone, and it's about 1 inch wide today. The fault runs out to the ocean, and then it ends up going into Connecticut down along, I think, past Cape Cod, called the Clinton-Newbury fault line. They actually took advantage of that split, and that became one edge of the stone. It was already done by nature for them, and they just had to, split the stone. And bedrock is foliated. The granite, does come up in layers, so they were able to work the stone, pop it up, and then they moved it probably about 15 feet into the structure. And it's the only two-story structure that we have on the site. It's called the Double Solar. Faces true east, but it's about a 14-ton stone. So, but in the Oracle Chamber, the one that Carole was interested in, the Oracle Chamber and the sacrificial table, there is a glacial erratic that's split, and I think it probably split naturally. And today it's about 4 feet. Each stone is about 4 feet from the other, and it looks like they moved the smaller piece, which is estimated to be around 50 tons. So almost 100,000 pounds.
Wow. So the possibilities that the 6 strong sons moved all these stones around in a couple of years,
or very strong daughters,
kind of put to the side for right now, I would think. They must have been particularly robust young individuals.
Yes.
Right.
Or how about this? The daughters used witchcraft. Well, no. Let's not hijack it there. Yeah.
Anything.
Right.
It just amazes me that there's so much evidence that's been overlooked, that there were other cultures, other visitors that came to the Americas. And it's not just in your place, although that seems to be a particular fulcrum, but there's so many different places that have these unusual, unexplainable artifacts. There's another stonework somewhere in New England that I can't think of. That's like an octagonal tower. Have you ever heard of that?
Oh, maybe the Newport Tower?
Newport,
in Rhode Island.
Yes.
It. I couldn't bring it to mind. Yes.
Yes, in Rhode Island,
And it's also similar stone structure, uncut.
It actually has a cement to it. It doesn't look like a windmill. And Governor Arnold, Benedict Arnold, said it was his stone tower. He was related to the famous, Benedict Arnold, but was his nephew. But it said it's a stone tower, but it has a chimney on the second floor for one thing, and if you lit a fire while you're grinding stuff, the whole thing would blow up. And it has these windows that align with the winter solstice, for instance, and it illuminates this stone that's shaped like an egg in the arch. On 9 o'clock in the morning on the winter solstice, it illuminates it beautifully. And it does have 8 legs, and it might have had a what do they call it? It's around the base of it. I'm trying to think of the name of it, but it actually had a skirted building around the bottom of it, they believe, at one time too. But I think the cement dated to around the 14th century. Also, they were able to get the shell. Shell was organic. They could actually date it in the concrete. And I got the whole report on that. But that puts it back again to the end of the Viking or the Greenlander time period.
It's still definitely pre-Columbian.
That's what we're interested in, exactly. Anything before 1492.
The other thing about that, and it's a different. It's definitely the structure in that it uses a true arch is of a different kind of architecture, a later kind of architecture, because you don't have that at your site, right?
Good point. We have the corbelling, the inverted staircase. I think Carole and I talked about that before.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
Like an upside down staircase. Yeah.
Absolutely. Let's flesh that out. Let's take those steps up that upside down Escher kind of staircase, and explain that for our listeners.
I will
Yeah.
put up a picture.
Yeah. Oh, great. Excellent. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Charles, thank you.
Yeah, we can hold a picture up and show everybody. But it does look like an inverted staircase. It's a way of bridging a ceiling, and
Mm-hmm.
each layer that you put up is a little bit further towards the center of the structure, and so it does look like a staircase upside down, not a true arch. And if you have the beehives, like in Ireland, for instance, pretty famous ones, you can see that kind of a corbelling shape, almost like an igloo, a dome shape.
Mm-hmm.
And other cultures use that too, and that's found in our Oracle Chamber on the east wing. The Oracle Chamber, if you look down at it and the roof was removed, you'd see it look like a letter Y. And they used to call it the Y cabin, like the letter Y. And the east side, it has the corbelling in it. But when you first walk into it, it's all vertical stacked stones, big, huge slabs of stones just stood up vertically with flat roof slabs. But you turn right and you go down to that other wing, and it's all corbelled. And Mr. Goodwin saw that everywhere, that corbelling everywhere, because that's one thing the Irish monks would do too. So he kind of, when they drew out the site, we have many really well sketched, sketches of the site made in the 1930s. We used to kind of joke that everything he saw here had kind of that corbelling in it, like a beehive shape. And we said he was seeing things. But when we get into the chamber with the roof slab, one of them that collapsed, we were looking at it 4 years ago, and we're looking at three of the corners, because the doorway corner, there was really no corner. The door goes against one of the walls, but the other three walls have corners. I should say the other three corners of the structure are corbelled, actually. And we looked at that and said, gosh, it's very subtle, but that's corbelling. And then we went into a chamber called the Paddy Chamber, and it's in the Paddy cellar hole, but it wasn't made by Paddy. It's where the house was. He just utilized the structure. If you look at three of those walls, because it's very similar to the other structure, they're corbelled too. They had a very subtle corbelling. And even the watch house has that corbelling in it too. So yeah, we don't have the true arch, but we do have corbelling at our height, and that is similar to sites in England and throughout the British Isles. And most people think of the Irish monks and that, and they do have that in their architecture, but it's elsewhere too. So we do have that corbelling there.
You also gave us a picture of an abandoned stone. Now that is one that's off-site, or not, or kind of off-site, that doesn't seem to be associated with anything.
Is that the stone?
How large is that one?
I don't know if Carole has a picture too. Is it the one that's kind of a big slab that's propped up with another a small stone under it?
I think so. Yes.
Okay. Well, in 1982, Dr. David Stuart Smith, who arrived back from England after working on British megalithic sites and medieval sites, he got a doctorate in historical theology. Historical anthropology. He got a doctorate in theology, and he was a master stonemason and a 32nd degree York Rites Mason. He's from Connecticut originally. He went to Europe, and he worked for the British government doing this restorations and getting an education. Came back in 78, and he was amazed that these New England sites existed. And it's actually more than New England. The sites, covering most of the Northeast. And he got involved with our site. And by 82, he was telling our staff, you might want to look, if you're out in the woods, if you see some stones out there that look like they're big flat slabs that might be raised up perhaps, the edge might look serrated, like somebody had taken a stone and struck it, and it was like the edge of like an arrowhead, kind of that little serration, Right. And so one of our staff members in 1982 was sitting on a stone.
That's the story I was hoping you would tell. Yes. She had decided to just go have her lunch there, right?
Exactly. And it was, at that time, it was pretty much just out in the woods. Since then, we've cleared it out so you can see it better. Yeah, she was just having her lunch, just enjoying herself. And as she was sitting there having her sandwich and having a drink, I guess, she looked down and she noticed the edge of the stone. I guess it must have come to her that, wow, this looks like it's got a serrated edge on it. Huh. And then she got off the stone because it was kind of elevated a little bit. And she looked back, and there's a lot of leaves and debris. It was kind of hard to see. But I think she peered under it and said, this stone has actually been propped up. And I think she could see the propping stone, among all the debris in there. And she brought it to the attention to David Stuart Smith. And the next year, and Dave, when he saw it, he was thanked her, and we were all like, wow, that's pretty cool.
Right.
The next year, he decided to do an excavation along that edge to see if he could recover any of the little stone flakes that would have been chipped off of it, just to verify that, in fact, that's what it was.
Right.
And he also got he got Dr. Gary Hume, who was a state archaeologist. I guess most states have a state archaeologist, and professional. And Dr. Gary Hume got interested, and he kind of oversaw the thing, Dave's excavation and everything. He was there as a witness, and he came down and checked on it and everything. And what he said after it was done is unmistakable. That this big slab was shaped like it's a multi-ton arrowhead. It was percussion flaking. It's like napping an arrowhead. It's a Stone Age technology. It's not a Metal Age technology.
Right.
So it would lead some evidence that this is something in ancient times that was being done, not something by the Patty family or somebody after or just before the Pattys. Since then, we found more of these. In the 80s, we probably had about 5 or 6 of these, and they vary in size from maybe a few feet across up to, that one was probably about 13 feet long by maybe about 5 or 6 feet wide, and maybe about 7 or 8 inches thick. But we have found even bigger ones. And when I retired, I found another probably 15 out in the woods, and other people helped me to find these. So we have 34, I believe, today. And just recently, in the last year or so, we started thinking, wow, wait a minute, 34 of these things, not 1 or 2. We think that they had a much grander plan for this place, and they abandoned it. For many years, we thought maybe the site was built, it could have been abandoned and reused, and and then the Pattys came along, and part of it was destroyed by the Patty family being there. But we think they had a bigger plan for it. And then the questions came up, well, what happened? Why was this work in progress stopped? Did these people, was it something to do with climate change? Was it war? Was it something else? One theory is that at the end of the Bronze Age, the market fell on bronze when the Iron Age came. And if people were bringing copper back from this continent to the old world kind of thing, maybe that trade, they had their depression, I guess, in the Bronze Age, in the copper trade and tin trade too. You mix copper and tin together, you get bronze. So that might have been it. Or maybe, there was the Carthaginian Wars, and if these people were, part of the Phoenician thing, when Rome conquered Carthage, maybe that also was an effect, something over there that affected over here. So we don't know, but there's some possibilities, So I think they had a bigger plan for the site, though. Some of these stones were multi-ton, over 1,000 feet from the main site and down the hill. So they were apparently going to drag these multi-ton stones up the hill and then build the site bigger, from what we can tell.
That's amazing. The other thing there is, at that time, at the end of the Bronze Age, there were several civilizations that collapsed in that economic turmoil, really. Some people think it had something to do with the introduction of iron, that killed that market. And there are any other different theories, but nobody seems to have a total grip on it. But another thing that they don't seem to have a total grip on is where all that copper that they used in the Middle East, in Egypt, where did all that copper come from? I mean, there was plenty of copper in Cyprus, which basically Cyprus has the name is copper, and there are other sites, but still. Then we found that there's. What is that? I think estimates have gone up to 500,000 tons of copper that are missing from the metallic copper mines in Wisconsin on the shores of Lake Superior.
Yes, right.
Yes.
Isle Royale. Yeah, 500,000 tons, I believe. Yeah, 500,000 tons. Yeah.
And New England
copper
would have been a nice stopping off point. On that voyage, going back across, taking advantage of winds and currents.
Exactly.
So, it makes a certain amount of sense that there would be a depot, maybe, or a last final stopping off point before they started their transatlantic voyage.
Yeah, that sounds. I've heard that. That's a theory that's going around. That sounds really very, very interesting. And even Poverty Point down in Louisiana, going down the Mississippi, would be also a possible point. on
exactly.
the way to the old world too, that way or through our area, So, because the rivers have changed their courses up here, and they're how deep they are, and some of their, the route that the river takes have changed too over the thousands of years too. So we're next to the Merrimack River, we're only a couple miles from that, and the Spigot River tributary goes right by our site. But yeah, the copper thing, and then when the Iron Age happened, like you say, I think it caused a lot of upheaval, and maybe it cut off some of the back and forth across the ocean. That's kind of an interesting theory, because they had a lot I think they were going to do here, and then something happened to these people, and it just stopped. And I think we're going to find more of these stones too, using LIDAR and some of the other technologies,
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, the main thing is now we're looking. People are looking. People are taking an interest in these things, where before they were just poo-pooed completely and given, so that couldn't possibly be, because it just isn't.
Right, and
a lot of those
also it doesn't
political rather than scientific.
It didn't align with the history books. Yep.
There we go.
Exactly. Yeah.
And
the history books are full of myth, a lot of myth in the history books instead of facts and stuff,
Exactly. And, then again, define myth, and it depends on, I don't know, are we talking socioeconomic, political, what is the, who makes those calls, who makes the decision? And of course, Houghton Mifflin, I mean, you have to rewrite a lot of stuff. And what do you include? What do you exclude? It seems to be sort of polarized. It seems to, I don't want to get conspiracy theorist, but, is there an agenda in, I guess this would fall into what we're talking about, falls into this forbidden archaeology, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and
hidden history and forbidden, yes.
Yep, hidden history, right.
Yeah. Could go back to John Wesley Powell, the Powell Doctrine, if you find an old world artifact, pre-Columbian, you're supposed to disavow it, ignore it, That goes back to when he was at the Smithsonian, So the Powell Doctrine might have been kind of at the beginning of that, maybe,
I wonder, what do you think that turned on, the Powell Doctrine, and why it became popular?
Geez, that's a great question. Because he was the head of the Smithsonian and had a lot of pull.
Yes.
And it seems like ever since then, it went from diffusion where the oceans may have been used as highways. People could have been crossing like the Vikings before Columbus and perhaps others to America. All the Americas are kind of a test tube, and they wanted to see how the cultures over here evolved independently from the rest of the world. And in order to make that work, you have to have 1492 as the time that contact was made and everything changed. So that was part of it, I think. I've read that, and I don't know how much of that is true. But if you start having Vikings and other people coming over, it kind of messes that all up. So Columbus is great, 1492, and that's when,
sailed the ocean blue. It even rhymes. Okay, right. Okay.
Yeah. So, but I don't know. It's been like that since the late 1800s, and people kind of went. Samuel Eliot Morison, the great naval historian from Harvard University, wrote Admiral of the Ocean Sea and European Discovery of America. And he basically coined a thing called NEPCO, No Explorers Before Columbus, NEPCO.
Whoa.
And, he had a running
No
battle
Explorers Before Columbus. Oh, that's incredible. That is new to me. Thank you for that. Wow.
Yeah, so that kind of sets a tone too, and he died in 1976, 16 years after the Viking settlement was found. So he did kind of allow that, well, maybe somebody came over, but it was inconsequential. It was not important. It didn't have any influence. It's, really not worth talking about. It's like, really? Well, then your theory's wrong, because somebody did come over. The Native Americans are already here. But yeah, somebody else came over called the Vikings, And maybe they were coming for 400 years now. But I think there are other people using the ocean coming across the Pacific and the Atlantic from different parts of the world to the New World, The Cherokee say their ancestors came across from the east, from the rising sun in the Cherokee tradition, from what I understand.
I didn't know that. Wow.
Yeah. And some have been on some of the history channels talking about that, their oral tradition. Mm-hmm. And archaeologists don't necessarily pay attention to oral tradition, which is kind of, I think, a little disrespectful. I mean, they should listen to some of that because that's
well,
their history
exactly.
About,
just because you have no, just because you're not the Grosvenors, of Smithsonian Institution, right? Yeah, you're okay. So right, and that's wow. So again, once again, I think something that we talked about in previous conversation was the fact that in order to get things to go in the popular mode by someone's agenda, you have to discredit. You have to discredit a culture, or you can't run roughshod. You can't make it. You can't mold it. Yeah. You have to take the pins out from under it, and or you have to acknowledge it, and that's something that seems to be a difficult thing for Europeans, Americans to do.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah.
Yikes. Yeah. Yikes is all I can say. So, all right. Well, okay. So, Charles, do you did I hijack you, Charles, from where you wanted to go?
No, please.
Okay, because
let's hear the story about the night in the chamber.
Oh yes,
I really
please.
I find that very entertaining.
It is incredible. It's like you can't make this stuff up. So take it away. The night in was it the Oracle Chamber?
Well, we were kids, we didn't know any better. So, and we were guides. I think it was 1972, and just getting out of high school and everything. And back then we used to have a lot of guides, because we had people up there and taking guided tours and everything. So we used to have a lot of staff, more than we have today. Today I think we have just the right amount of staff, but so we had a lot of us working there as friends and everything. So we decided, and there was electricity up there at the time. We had actually electric power up on the site, and we brought a TV up there, and we're going to spend the night there too. So. But anyway, we brought a TV, a black and white little TV, put it on the top of the sacrificial table, and I think about 10 of us, we watched the Planet of the Apes, which was pretty cool, Is night.
That not perfect at night in this place? I mean, that is just like, okay, if I was doing this, that's so cinematic, okay? And so the film would sort of begin there, and then everything else would be backstory. It's just, that absolutely is so intriguing. And now, can you describe this chamber for us? The sacrificial table on which you set up this little black and white TV. I love it. What's the size of that sacrificial table?
Well, it's very large. Yeah, it's actually shaped like a bell, kind of a bell shape, and it's about 9 feet long and about 6 feet wide, about a foot thick. And it weighs about 9,000 pounds, so 4.5 tons. So it's a really big stone. And we do know its quarry site. It was actually quarried out of the bedrock about 40 feet to the north of where it is presently. And that is where the astronomical center was set up. So apparently they may have had an earlier astronomical center out at this, what we call the Equinox Boulder. That's about 200 feet from the site. And we have maps drawn from that, and some of the alignments work very nicely off that. You could say coincidence or not, but it looks like they moved the astronomical center to where the sacrificial table was quarried from, and they put 2 big piles of rocks there called cairns. And this is the north and south, and they're in Goodwin's book, and he thought that they were connected to the Oracle Chamber, and they were beehive chambers, but they were solid cairns, just solid piles of rocks. And it wasn't until the survey work began in the 1970s that we actually determined that was the astronomical center. But unfortunately, Mr. Goodwin, 80 years ago in the late 1930s, when he found they were not connected to the Oracle Chamber and they were not beehive chambers, hollow inside,
right,
he started using some of the stones for rebuilding a ramp, which is in front of the sacrificial table. And we got pictures of that, actually, with a big tripod of wood, wooden legs, 3 legs set up, with a hoist with a crank on it, and they were cranking up some of the stones from there to be put on top of the ramp. So he basically destroyed the astronomical center of the site, not knowing. Most of the stuff was good. Most of the stuff, he just took a stone and put it back within 3 feet of a wall, and they photographed everything. But in that case, he must have thought it was a discarded pile of just rubble, and he said, well, let's use that to rebuild part of the ramp for some reason. And they did. In 1970s, we said, gosh, the center of the astronomical alignment seems to be north of the table, because some people thought the table might be it, because it's a really, it's a very big feature of the site.
Right.
It was not. as we started learning more about the astronomical alignments, we realized that it was, north of the table. And we're like, well, there's nothing there. And then we went back and started reviewing his book and notes, and we got tons of that, and slides and photographs and everything, and glass slides even, before the plastic slides that you could look at.
Right.
And,
Plates,
and Malcolm
right.
being a professional photographer, his right-hand man was a professional photographer. That was wonderful to have that to record all of that. I was, oh my God, he destroyed. And there they are in the diagrams, the two cairns.
Wow.
And everything goes to those two stone piles, and so we put a wooden platform there today. So yeah, the table's are very large, and it's got a groove on it that's actually trapezoid shape. I thought it was always rectangular, but it's 9 inches narrower at the top than it is at the bottom, so it's a trapezoid. The chamber I mentioned that had the roof slab fallen when we felt that has fallen in. It's very hard to measure because the roof slab's kind of blocking part of it. So if we can ever get the roof slab out of there, that several-ton roof slab, we'd like to measure it very carefully because it looks like the floor plane is trapezoid. It's not rectangular. And then patty chamber, we checked that, and it appears to be trapezoid. And that's used by a lot of ancient cultures too, whether it's in South America or even in British megalithic sites. The trapezoid shape's there too. In Ireland, the trapezoid shape shows up too. And I've been reading about that more recently, going, oh, so that would not be out of place to have a trapezoid groove on the table and some of the floor plans being trapezoid. Now the table is facing true east and west. The whole site is orientated true north, south, east, and west out of true north. And there is a star back then that they could have used for reference called Thuban, and it's in the constellation of the dragon called Draco.
Yes.
And of the serpent, So, but to the east of the table is the Oracle Chamber, and that Oracle Chamber is pretty fascinating because it's the biggest structure still remaining on the site. It's about 27 feet long, north and south. As I mentioned, it's vertical stacking inside of stones. And the east part of it is that core build section. It has 5 stone closets or niches, probably for offerings to be placed inside of. It has a big stone bench. It has 2 underground drains. These drains are storm drains to keep the structure dry, and there's about 12 of these drains on the site. Some of these drains run 75 feet, and they're actually like tunnels. They have parallel walls with capstones. Some have been excavated, and inside they'll find, both modern and ancient artifacts. The ancient artifacts will be something like hammerstones, stone scrapers and things like that get washed into these drains, I guess. And some modern stuff, too, that gets washed in there, probably from the Patty family. It has a tube that connects the Oracle Chamber to the table. It's called the Oracle Tube. It's 6 feet. It's a kind of a square tube, and it's horizontal. And below it in the Oracle Chamber is a stone step. It's part of the original bedrock. So they quarried part of the floor to make the floor lower so you could stand up in this structure. It's 6.5 feet tall. You stand on the step and you yell, and you're facing the west, and the voice comes out underneath the sacrificial table. And if you were standing on that ramp, I mentioned earlier, they removed and destroyed part of the astronomical platform to help rebuild that ramp, part of it. You stand there and you're looking down at the table, you're watching a ceremony, the voice comes out underneath the table, and it makes it sound like somebody, like a ghost, like maybe a spirit or, somebody speaking to.
Well, see, that is where, okay, that's, theatrical background here. That is exactly where I was going. We didn't talk about this before, but I was thinking is that, a ceremonial, is that a presentational thing to add, drama to some sort of a ceremony?
Exactly. I think it
was. Oh my
was,
gosh.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And
wow.
Recently we realized by looking at the speaking tube, the part that comes out under the table looks like it's kind of rectangular or square, but it's actually shaped like a trumpet, how it kind of flares out.
Right.
And I believe that would help magnify the voice, make it sound louder. And we never knew that before. It's like, wow, that's kind of acoustical thing, I guess.
That is incredible. And so we're talking about not really happenstance. We're talking about intention.
Right, exactly, yeah. I don't think a farmer or a shoemaker would use any of these features in that structure. It's just so sophisticated and connected to the sacrificial table, It has a chimney, too, on the north end of it, and they had 2 stone louvers that would adjust the draft, and a stone that would actually slide over the top of it, blocking the entire... So you wonder if during a ceremony, smoke would come out of that hole or something, because it looks like there's not a chamber. It looks just like part of the whole hilltop. You don't even know that Oracle Chamber exists. It's hidden,
Okay, smoke coming out of a chamber. What am I thinking? Something found in Greece. within the last, I don't know, decade that indicated that perhaps this is totally
oracles?
yes, and
Oracles that had a fumarole,
right,
volcanic.
And the Sibyls, etc., and
Yes.
the mystics. That doesn't do it justice. But in other words, that this and the idea that the smoke was somehow infused
Enhanced
with something,
the-
something psychedelic, etc.
Yes,
Huh.
correct.
Okay, thank you, Charles, because otherwise I would have thought I was, I'd really
You
lost
were
it.
right there.
Okay,
You were right there.
So,
right on track.
Wow.
See?
So I'm just wondering how.
I hadn't connected that, but it's from the same time.
Yeah.
And the same cultures.
We
And it
my
goes
gosh.
all the way back to that original megalithic culture.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, are you thinking of Delphi, Carole?
Yes, the Oracle of Delphi.
Oh,
Thank you, Dennis. That's it.
My wife and I went there, on a honeymoon, and it was pretty amazing. They even had underground. They had actually some of the drains like we have at our site, which I thought was like this is beautiful Delphi, and I'm looking at the drains on the ground, but whatever.
Okay, exactly.
Yes, the devil's in the details, I guess.
Yeah, nuts and bolts.
But we're sitting on an earthquake fault line, and Delphi is sitting on an earthquake fault line, and I think you were getting onto, some gases coming out of there, and those gases may have affected the mind during ceremonies and could have altered your state of mind, is one of the theories, And I think when you Google it, you can find that out too. So maybe the gases coming out of that crack in the bedrock, they're cause people to go into a different state of mind,
an altered state. Yes. And wow, oh my gosh, this is the last place I expected this interview to go. So, this is one of the incredible beauties of, having 2 hours and having this energetic thing that just can sort of like, we can spring off of each other, et cetera, et cetera. Wow. So, okay. So, and there's stuff I want to ask you too, and in terms of, I do want to talk about your time as a pilot and this possible UFO. But before we leave, the chambers and stuff, and Charles' input, what do you and what does your daughter-in-law and what is your wife? I got to do this. It's not really, I guess it's a gender imperative, but, speaking of the oracles of Delphi or the oracle, females, is there, what is, I don't even know how to verbalize this, but I guess where I'm going is gut level reactions of like, what's it all about? Is there some intuitive connect that any of them have gotten or that you get?
I think the feeling is, it's number one, it's an ancient site and it's a ceremonial site, not a place where people live, that people would gather at our site. It's astronomical, it's up high. And sometimes ancient cultures would put things up high, like if you didn't have something high, place to put something high, you'd build a pyramid and put a temple on top of it kind of thing. But I think it's something to do with the heavens. Looking at the stars, the constellations, it ties into the walls, the serpent walls, probably into the ceremonies. So I think it's a place, it's kind of a spiritual place where people came. Maybe it was when, one of the alignments, they'd have a big celebration, perhaps when somebody was married, maybe when somebody died. Some of the structures probably served as tombs. So like megalithic sites, tombs, temples, and, monuments. And that's Stonehenge is all of those, because they had cremation ashes in some of the Aubrey holes, although it's really a temple site too, it wasn't just a place to burial. Even our cathedrals, you go in there and worship, but there may be people buried in the floor below you.
Right, exactly.
So it's not necessarily,
Correct.
It's not necessarily just a place of burial. It's a place of celebration and worship, and so maybe our sites like that. And a lot of these sites, there are about 800 sites throughout the Northeast, and some of these sites are probably linked to our site, we believe. Probably where people gathered. It's not their homes, not their domiciles. They would have lived in wood, bark, or hide structures, which are now long gone, and hard to find too, because they're underground. You'll just find some of the stone artifacts or whatever, So the gut feeling is that the place is a ceremonial place. The processional walls are where the people probably came up, did their celebrations, and then on the other side, they could have left the site. There's actually a whole processional path system through the entire hilltop, one that brings you to the site and then one that takes you away from the site. Kind of like the West Kennett Avenue near Avebury in England. That's one example of a processional path, possibly,
Ah, right. Mm-hmm. Okay, and now this is actually, this is kind of out there. Have you have you ever considered the possibility, or you may even have done this, and I would be, unaware of it, of having any kind of I don't know what I want to say, because it's
sensitive.
Okay,
perhaps?
There we go. A sensitive
visit the site.
Yes, exactly. Thank you, Charles. A sensitive, also called, and unfortunately, it's not a pejorative in my mind, but a psychic medium. Anybody who has someone ever come through and gotten some sort of information that they conveyed to you?
Yeah, I mean, we've had people come up, in the 60s and 70s. They did send one of the pieces of quartz crystals to I believe it was a woman, perhaps, out in California. And there's a type of reading, I forget, it begins with a P, I think, when you can read like crystals.
Psychometry? Maybe psychometry.
Yeah.
Okay, right. By touching. Yes, right. Uh-huh.
And if I can ever find that report, and it probably goes back to the mid-60s, if I can find that report, and we're on maybe in the next couple of weeks, if I can find that, I would love to find it. I'll photograph it. I'll send a picture of that to you, that report.
Oh, that would be great.
But I can't remember I just remember, we're talking over 50 years ago. So just my dad talking about it, and my mom and some of the researchers of what the person experienced. I think they were talking about the type of people, and the time period and what the site might have been used for. But the details kind of escaped me after over 50 years.
Exactly. But, you're right.
But Hans Holzer did visit the site, I believe, in 70, 71, 74, and 76. In 74, he brought up 3 different psychics. Ethel Myers was one of them, and then 3 others, and I've forgotten their names. But he wrote a book in 1992, and it was called Long Before Columbus. So that book came out on Columbus's 500th year anniversary, but it was 18 years after he brought the 4 psychics. I'm not sure why it took so long, but he was pretty busy writing other books and TV and radio and stuff.
Yes.
Now the Holzer files are on TV, and they are kind of interested in maybe doing something on us, because there's 16 millimeter film that they took of his visits, and also the tape recordings. And then he wrote the book too. So that's a new series on Travel Channel. And the 4 psychics came in independent. They came in separately during the course of the year. And I just read the book in the last few months, probably in December again. I reread it probably for the 3rd time since 1972. And basically, they kind of described the type of people, the size, and I think there are 2 different types of people. I believe the 4 psychics seem to be on the same page too, describing, I think there was a shorter, darker complexion people, and then there was a taller people, maybe a little lighter complexion. But it was 4 months ago that I read it, so I'm forgetting some of the details.
Right.
But it's in his book, and that's probably, he's one of the biggest ones. Jeff Belanger's been up, I think.
Yes, so New England Psychic Society, or I got that name wrong, but yes. Okay, right. Yeah, I'm hoping to reach out and get him on the show.
Yeah,
right.
And talk to him about our site too. He he's been there a few times, and he's brought up one of the 3 hosts of that show, Ghost Adventures, that's been to our site and walked around the site and everything. But we've had others. We've had Paranormal, in the fall we usually have Paranormal. We haven't had any for the last 3 years, actually 4 years since I retired. And I usually work weekends, so I usually miss them because they're on Saturdays. But we would have these, some of the people are very good. They do a pre-ghost hunt in the theater. They explain all the equipment they're going to use and what they're going to do up there. And then they go up for a couple hours at night on Saturday night, go up there and they experience this whole thing with their equipment and their own sensitivity. Come back, and then they do a briefing in the theater. But I was on the road flying usually Friday through Mondays because they got the best schedules. So I missed a lot of that, unfortunately. But we're kind of interested in that for sure.
Oh, that's fascinating. That part of it never actually occurred to me. And by the way, I think this is the part where I want to clue the listeners in terms of, okay, I'm going to read this. It's a public service announcement from your site. Dear friends, while we continue to remain open during the COVID-19 crisis as an essential business to the mental health and well-being of families, we've made a few adjustments to our policies in the hope of keeping our visitors and staff healthy. 1, all ticket purchases must be made online on our store. We will no longer be accepting cash or credit cards presented in person for a contactless check-in outside the visitor center. 2, we have reduced our admission rates, and tickets purchased online at the discounted rate will never expire. Even if you want to stay at home now and visit us next year, those tickets will let you in at a reduced rate. 3, the gift shop will be closed to visitors except for the use of our restrooms. Tour guide maps and instructions will be given outside by the front door. 4, the main site will remain open as usual. Please use good common sense and exercise safe physical distancing of at least 6 feet, etc., etc. If you or someone in your immediate family is feeling ill or has a fever, please, we ask that you stay safely at home. Thank you for all your understanding during these turbulent times. Be well, the Stone family. And that is just, also, I don't want to forget this part. There's an orientation video online, and you can download the mobile tour app with audio tour. This is like addressing it, and this is just you guys really, shall we say, have your act together. It's fabulous.
Yeah, my daughter-in-law and my wife did a lot on that, and I put my 2 cents in. But yeah, it's working out really well with 110 acres. There's nobody close to anybody up there, so it's nice fresh air. And if they look at the app, it's pretty good. It's under America Stonehenge, and you can actually do a whole tour in your lazy boy chair if you want at home. And it has
Yes.
text pictures, and it talks to you, so it's kind of good. And then you mentioned the video from the theater. I think it's 11 minutes long.
Yes, and that's a
which is
fabulous
good.
video that's got the high spots, et cetera, and a bunch of history. That's just incredible.
Thank you.
Again, what an intriguing thing. Listen, when everything loosens up and we can travel again, and gas is going to be 50 cents a gallon. I don't know what's going on. But I can't think of anything I would rather do than make that trek. That would be just a fabulous journey.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So all right. Now we've got some time left. So Charles, did you want to go any place that I didn't let you?
I think we've pretty well covered a lot of ground here tonight. We've gone all the way from 2000 BC to today.
Right, exactly.
So I think that's good. I think we've covered just about everything. We just need to fill in all the details.
Exactly. We need a little bit of explanation.
I have often visited the ancient sites in my area, and I always do get a sense of place. I can't say I'm getting any, but it feels. I've been to Serpent Mound in Ohio. I've been to a couple other earthworks in Ohio. I truly love Meadowcroft Rock Shelter in Pennsylvania.
Oh yeah.
And I get chills every time I go there. Any of those. It's just a sense of place. It's a sense that it's a special place. I can't explain it, but I can, and it doesn't really tell me anything, but it's extraordinary, and it's I consider it real. So there you go.
It's some sort of sensitivity to the vibes, to the energies of everything that's gone
I honestly
before.
don't know. Maybe it has something to do with ley lines, which I know absolutely nothing about. But yes, it's kind of a extraordinary feeling. It's a good feeling. So
that's what we get at my site too. You stole my words. That's how a lot of people say that about our site too. That same. Just what you just said.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing it someday, soon.
Oh, I got to get out to Ohio and see some of the the serpent. I used to land in Columbus, right near Newark.
Oh, yes.
And I went there so many times, and I was in Worthington doing over at the hotel, and I just came across some of the notes in my dad's files, and there are actually some chambers in that area of Worthington, which I didn't know. And I wish I had taken the time to have the van driver at the hotel bring me over or something like that, to visit them. I probably stayed there 50 times, not realizing there's I guess It's kind of a pyramidal structure, kind of square base. It might have been a conical mound, but in Worthington, I knew that they were in Newark and Chillicothe and Serpent, but I
Actually-
retired 4 years ago. I would have
Actually,
been there. I would
there
have,
was at one time
Yeah.
a very large, say near 100 feet tall, stone pyramid
wow.
Oh,
east
Wow.
of Columbus that was dismantled in the 1920s for road
Oh
gravel.
boy. Oh,
And
boy,
it was
that's
it
happened
was
so-
it was
oh,
very
wow.
unique in that it was
What
one
a
of the
shame.
few stone structures
Wow.
in Middle America.
That's
Really,
amazing. That's amazing.
And,
What a
and where do
shame,
you
too.
exactly? And that how many times
Wow.
did that happen, Charles? What happened to the stone? What did they use it for?
they paved a road with it.
Okay, so what happens when one rides over that road? Okay.
Well, I mean, it's better. It's
Hmm.
better than building a Walmart, which is what happened to one in Alabama just a couple of years ago.
Oh, I
So-
heard of that. I did hear
Yeah.
that. Yes. Yeah. What a shame.
Wow.
Well, I think Ohio had about 10,000 mounds. I don't know what the number is remaining, and Indiana had about 5,000 mounds. And because Milwaukee and Madison, Wisconsin, are built on ancient mounds too, and St. Louis was Mound City. And I got pictures 15 years during the right around the time of the Civil War, starting in the 1850, I think it was, up to 1854, I believe it was, 100 years before I was born, up to 1869. They have cranes. I didn't realize they had that type of equipment, actually tearing down those huge mounds with the cranes, leveling them for the city of St. Louis. And
Oh.
sitting on them.
Yes.
There's only a couple
Yes.
little mounds left there, but just destroying
Mhm.
them all, you know.
I know
Yeah.
that wasn't intentional, but I mean, what a heartbreak.
Right, right.
That is just
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
such a cavalier behavior to just like tear it down and we'll use it for our own needs. Okay, before we go, I as in all your time, definitely, Dennis, as a pilot, when we spoke before on Earth Radio with Charles and Ron Toltbar, we talked about something that you saw that you could not explain, something that I don't know. Well, technically, it was unidentified, it was flying, and it was an object. Can you would you like to share that again?
Yeah, actually, that one was actually on the ground. Actually,
Oh,
flying,
on the
we saw things-
ground.
Yeah, well, flying over. I was always interested in this subject, so I flew for 42 years and 37 professionally, and I in the 80s for 3 years I was on the UPS system flying a 727 at night, and oftentimes we'd see things, because we're flying at night and our eyes are all red, and we never saw the sun for a week at a time. We had a week on and a week off. It was in the wintertime particularly. I'm looking at they look like zombies. I was a flight engineer and the co-pilot captain would turn around and look like, like vampire. But because we didn't see daylight, I think we flew once in those 3 years during the day and we're like, my God, what is that? Oh, it's the sun, But we would see things, and most of the guys I flew with were, ex-military guys, and they would talk about some of the things they saw when they flew in the military. But we'd see things off in the distance, and they weren't, encounters of the first, second, or third time. These things are so far distant, but the thing would change color, and then it would go away. You wouldn't see it. And say, well, did that get behind a cloud? Was that a landing light? Was that Venus? And you'd come back on. But it was so far distant that you couldn't really identify it as it was something out there, but what was it,
Right.
And that was the problem. That was the frustration of it. And we'd all be looking at it going, yeah, that is kind of unusual, Could have been a UFO or could have been something else. But we saw it coming home from one of the researchers from my dad's research group. He had a camp on a lake, and one of my friends was with me, and his father was an air traffic controller for, the FAA, and because he had some interesting stories about what he saw on primary radar, at the Boston Center, which is still there in Nashua, New Hampshire, that controls all the Northeast traffic, and then New York has its own center in Long Island. There are 21 of those centers across the country, and he'd have some really interesting stories, particularly when he came over to the pool and they were having beers and stuff, and his, the lips loosened up a little bit, and they started talking about this stuff. But so his son was with us in a station wagon, and we drove around Manchester, New Hampshire, heading south around this outer belt of Manchester, and we saw the thing in the sky, all of us. I think there was 5 of us in the car. It was just brilliant. And as we went around that outer belt, we went right around the whole thing, and we never, figured out what it was. But the next morning on the radio, they were talking about it on the radio station. So we weren't the only ones to see it. I would say that's probably,
God.
It was brilliant silver, and it was at night though. It was just very, very brilliant. It wasn't Venus. I go out and Venus was just out, I think a couple of days ago. I was looking at Venus out there. And that's brilliant. This is not that, though. This is something different, totally different.
Not
And
Venus.
so that was my
different.
UFO, and I ended up flying 30,000 hours, but I never had a close encounter. I always kept my eyes open, though.
Wow. Oh, this is incredible. And we will leave on that note. Thank you so much, Dennis Stone. This has absolutely been incredible. And again, we will have you back behind the obsidian curtain in the next month. I don't have a date to pull out of my mind at the moment. Thank you, Charles Smarr, for, all of your input. And this was absolutely fantastic. This has been Paranormal Now, which usually is Alan B. Smith. Tonight, it was me, Carole. And all we can say is we are all in this together. And as Alan ends his show, for now, live in the mystery. Oh, but don't touch that dial. Stay tuned for Jimmy Church. Thank you all, everybody. Take care. Be safe. Be well. We love you.